Hi everybody, welcome to Mark's 900. I'm Mark. Well, it's been a while, but to be fair, I've been quite busy, and more importantly, I've been away on a tour around Spain and France. That took us 8 days, and at the end of that, I needed to put a video together for all my mates, sort of start to finish, quite a long film of all the things that we did, all the different clips. That's not for you guys, that's quite a long video, as I say, it's kind of like looking at my holiday snaps, and you don't really want that. So instead, what I'm going to do today is talk about that trip, but more sort of the admin side of things, what we had to do. So the sorts of stuff I'm talking about is things like how we planned it, how did we decide how many people were going to go, where we were going to go, where we were going to stay, and so on. I've got some top tips in there that you might not have thought about. Now, we're also going to talk about what we took with us in terms of not just your clothes, but what other things do you need to take? What's it like to get on a ferry or a cruise ship? Because that can be quite intimidating if you've never done it. And then there's the differences in riding in other countries like Spain and France, other than obviously it's on the other side of the road. I'm also going to look at some of the technology that we used, and then what went wrong and what went well. So hopefully at the end of this, if you're planning a trip, then you're going to learn something. As I say, this isn't a travel show. I'm not going to tell you about all the wonderful vistas and all the things that you absolutely have to go and visit. You make your own adventures. So this is just to help you with that, and hopefully it'll be some use. So me and a mate of mine decided that we wanted to go away on a trip, and we had a discussion about this, and we had to think about how many people it would be best to take with us, and we figured the optimum number was somewhere between 4 and 6. So if we got 6 people together, chances are 1 or 2 will drop out. I mean, any less than 4, and you don't really have enough people to have enough banter. And if you've got more than 6, there's just too many people. You can't keep your arms around all of them. There's always going to be somebody who's a bit late. There's always going to be somebody who's going to have a breakdown. And, you know, when you're with a group of you riding, if one person breaks down, effectively, you've all broken down. So, as I say, we thought 6 was the right number, and then we had to think about where we wanted to go. And my mate's pretty well travelled anyway, and he had some ideas about where he wanted to go. He said, I want to go through Spain, and I want to go through the desert, and then I want to ride over the Pyrenees, and then when we're in France, I want to go to Bordeaux. So we had a rough idea of what we wanted to do. So we put that out there to the boys on our little WhatsApp group, and immediately, as soon as you start talking about a trip around Europe, you get loads of volunteers. So we instantly got 6 people, and do you know what? All 6 of us actually went as well. So this wasn't a case of anybody drop out. So we had our first meeting, and we all got together, and we planned out a route. And we also decided where we were going to stop along the route. And the way we did that was we went on to booking.com. I mean, you could use whatever website is your choice, but we went to booking.com and we selected a property stops along the way that we wanted to do on the route. And I'll show you the route up on the screen. Then we also booked our ferry tickets out there as well. So that was it. At that point, you've made commitment because we took the ferry from Plymouth down to Santander, and that ferry in itself was a few £100s. So, you know, once the guys have paid up for that, in effect, they paid a deposit. So that was how we planned it all together. And then there's a few of us who are kind of more like office workers than the others, and we're quite good with spreadsheets and things like that. So one of the other lads put together a spreadsheet and started to map it all out. Now, he used a template that he downloaded from the internet, but he did a fabulous job. I'll show you the template on the screen. Now, this to me is fantastic. What you've got there, it tells you who's on the trip, what each individual leg of the trip is. And then gradually as time went on, we also managed to put some actual routes on there. So you could just click on a link and get to the route. And there's also a what 3 words reference for where each of the hotels are. So at this stage, we also started to plan our kit list. So we put together a kind of checkbox list of everything that everybody would need to take. And there were some people who were taking some very specific things that were sort of team items as well. So we'll come into that a little bit more later on. And we needed somewhere to put all this information. So you've got things like the tickets, you've got the routes, the spreadsheet, the kit list, and we decided to put all that onto a cloud space. So one of the guys had a cloud space and he set up a shared area. We put all the pieces of information in there. And then once we'd done that, we also created a folder for each of the people that would go in. And we said to everyone, look, in your folder, just dump in there, first of all, next of kin details. And we came up with a form for that as well. So we've got the next of kin form. Also, copies of things like your driving license, your tickets, a picture of your passport just in case you happen to lose it, that might be useful, and copies of all of your insurance and also your breakdown cover as well. So everything was held on the cloud. So that means even if you lose your phone, you've still got access to all your documents and stuff. So that was a fantastic idea. Everybody could see everybody else's details, and it was locked down as well to us. So don't just put all those sorts of details onto the cloud and leave it wide open. Only we can go and see it. So that was great stuff. That really sort of covers the planning. We did have a subsequent meeting where we just went through a few things before we left. At that point, we also booked the return ferry as well. So the planning was actually remarkably easy for us. We had a good idea of where to go. We did throw it open and say, does anybody want to go and see anything else? But there wasn't any takers for that. So we had the route planned. We had a place where we could store all of our information, and all the lads were savvy enough that they could get into there and then just either read what they needed to or contribute to it as well. So that was the planning. So next up, let's talk about who went, what on, and where we went. So there, as I say, there were 6 of us. I'd say we're all in fairly reasonable health. I think 5 of us were around the age of 50, not particularly super fit. And bearing in mind, this is going to be 8 days of riding. So we're a little bit nervous about that, but it wasn't really a problem because at the end of the day, you're just sat on a bike, aren't you? Anyway, so there were the 6 of us. And what were we riding? Well, of course, me on the Z900. I had a mate of mine on an MT09, another one on a Street Triple. So that was 3 of us that were like road bikes. And 3 of my mates were on dual sports, so we had one on an Africa Twin, one on a Triumph Tiger, and one on a very nice Ducati Multistrada Pikes Peak. Where we went, I've mentioned a bit of this already. We started off in Gloucestershire and then we went down. We met one of the lads down on the south coast in Plymouth, and then from Plymouth, after a nice lunch, we hopped on the ferry, and nearly 24 hours later, we landed in Santander. From there, we had to do a quick trip down the motorway and get to Calahorra for our first night. And then the next morning was really exciting because that was the one where we went through a desert or badlands called the Bandanas Reales, and then from there the next day I think we were up over the Pyrenees, and then we were into France, and for the remainder of the journey was about working our way up through France back up to the northern part of France to a place called Roscoff, where we spent our last night in the sort of mainland Europe. And then the next morning it was onto another ferry across the UK. Then right at the end, once we were back in the UK, 2 of us decided that we wanted another little excursion, so we actually rode up through Dartmoor when the rest of them went straight up the M5 and back home to Gloucestershire. Now let's talk about baggage and what we took with us. So if we have a look at these pictures, you'll see that I'm rocking the SW Motex as per my previous video. I also took an RST backpack as well. Wasn't sure about that. None of the other boys took a backpack. I'm used to wearing one, and actually I found it really comfortable, so that wasn't a problem even for the 8 days. Then we've got the Ducati with side panniers. Now he managed to get those off eBay, absolute bargain, and he supplemented that with a BagTech tail pack. Then we got the MT09, and that's got the full SW Motec panniers and a Gerbing tail pack. So the Street Triple's gone for a slightly different approach with an enormous tail pack from SW Motec and also a tank pad from SW Motec as well. And then we come on to the Africa Twin with its massive rear panniers. That's all he needed. And finally we have the Triumph Tiger, which also comes with its own very large panniers, but he supplemented those as well with an Oxford tail pack. So there we go. That was all the luggage we took. So what did we put in that luggage? Well, obviously there's our clothing that we needed to take with us for the nights out, and obviously changes of clothing on the bikes. But also we had some sort of group items, which were things like puncture repair kit, which was different for both groups, whether you're a roadie or a dual sport, just because obviously the roadies have got tubeless tyres, so we tend to use those, I think they're called bacon strips, that like puncture repair kits that you can get. So we took some of those. And we also took a can of tyre weld. And then for the dual sports, they have the ability to just whip their inner tube out and fix any punctures that way. So they took puncture repair kits and tyre levers. We took spanners that fitted pretty much every nut and bolt, including all the sort of hex bolts, and we took some zip ties because you never know when you need zip ties. Same goes for gaffer tape, and we also took some of that epoxy resin stuff, so that if you ever had like a pinhole puncture in your oil filter or something like that, you can always just fill it up with a bit of epoxy resin. So those were sort of some of the ideas of extra things that we took on top of our normal useful kit. And as I say, we did write a kit list and add check boxes so that you could go through and make sure that you had actually taken everything with you. One thing I will say with all that extra kit that we took with us is that we were clearly prepared for the absolute worst. Now, as it turned out, we didn't have a single mechanical failure whatsoever, and we didn't have any punctures either. Now, that's not to say don't take that kit with you. Of course, take it all, and I would bet if we didn't take it, we would have needed it. So we didn't need any of it. The only thing we did use was some oil. So I got some little bottles that had originally contained vape juice, and I gave them a swill out with some oil, and then I filled them with gear oil. So they were very small and easy to carry, and I had about 3 or 4 of them. And when we had one stop, I gave them to the lads, and they all just oiled their chains, and that was pretty much the only mechanical thing that we did throughout the entire journey. Okay, so I've got another short list of things that you have to take with you, and these are called legal requirements. So for most of these, you have to take them with you if you're traveling in Spain, and particularly France seem to have some quite strict rules. Now, most of these are on our kit list as well. So what you've got then is your passport, obviously, your license, The V5, that's not a copy, you have to take your actual V5 with you. You need your insurance. Again, that needs to be printed out, not just a link to a website somewhere. You need a UK sticker on your number plate, not a GB sticker anymore, but a UK sticker. That's since Brexit. You need a high-vis jacket, an alcohol tester. Well, I don't think many people carry one of those. Reflective stickers on your helmet. Again, I don't think anybody's going to be pulled over for not having those. CE approved gloves. Well, that's not a bad idea anyway. European health insurance card. That's obviously highly recommended. You don't need a visa yet to travel in mainland Europe if you're from the UK, although, again, since we've left the EU, that might be something that comes in the future. And finally, there's another comment that says that loud pipes are frowned upon. Now, I got all that information from bennetts.co.uk. They've got a fabulous website with all of that listed out with a whole bunch of detail against each of it. So if you're in any doubt, go and see bennetts.co.uk. Right, the final thing I'm going to mention in terms of stuff that you need to take with you is bike locks. Obviously, every night we had to lock our bikes up outside strange hotels that we've never been to before. We don't know what the local areas are like, and so take as much in the way of bike security as you can manage. So next up, we're going to talk about technology. Now, even if you're the sort of person that still has a carburettor, a magneto and manual points, you can't help but appreciate the joys of the modern telephone. So I use mine as a sat-nav device, I use it to pay for things, I use it for sending emails, and occasionally I even use it as a phone. So it's pretty critical for me. Now, what actually happened to mine was that I got a little bit of moisture into the charging point, and so it wouldn't charge. One of the other lads had a crack on his screen, and when we went into the rain got into the phone and it totaled his phone. So we had a bit of a problem there. And it's not until you haven't got your phone that you realise just how much you appreciate it. So if you can take a spare phone perhaps that you can put your SIM card into, or maybe think of a way that you don't have to have it attached to your handlebars in the middle of the pouring rain, then I think that's a really good idea. Now, in terms of sat-nav, I mean, how wonderful. How the hell did we ever get our way across Europe without sat-nav in the old days? I just cannot imagine it. Now, one thing I will say, here's a top tip, right? All use the same sat-nav. So we had one guy on Beeline, we had a guy using Calimoto, we had somebody using Google Maps, somebody using Apple Maps, and honestly, it would take us in different directions all the time. In fact, there was one point in Roscoff where we only had to go 6 minutes from our hotel to the port, and Beeline versus Google Maps was the exact opposite at every single turn on the way to the port. It was comical. So that can get a bit awkward. So you either just have faith in whoever's leading is on point at the time, that they follow their sat-nav no matter what it is, and everybody else just falls into line, or you all use the same sat-nav. It doesn't matter which one you use, because ultimately you're going to get to the place you want to get to. It's just that you don't want to be having arguments as you get there about whether you go left or right at the T-junction. So yeah, sat-nav is completely brilliant, but it does help if either you're all on the same one or you're listening to the point man. Other things that we took were cameras, so 2 of us had GoPros, and also I took my drone. Now, I really, if I'm honest with you, I bought that drone specifically for this trip. And once I bought the drone and the extra batteries and the charging pack and so on, you got quite a big piece of luggage there. That took up nearly a whole pannier, which is the reason I had to take a backpack. Was it worth it? I'm not totally convinced that that drone was worth the effort and the space it took up. I mean, I did get some good shots, but really, that was a lot. And one of the things we wanted to do was get all 6 of us charging across the desert with the sort of dust flying out the back of our wheels, and get all that with drone footage following us. And then when we got to the desert, the Bardenas Realis desert, we were right in the middle of it, and it's a no-fly zone for drones. I'm not sure why. There's an airport there. It kept asking me for permission. The drone's not hooked up to the internet, and it didn't have a Wi-Fi signal. I probably could have done something technical with my phone, but ultimately, by that stage, the boys were a bit bored, and they just wanted to get riding. So we didn't get any drone footage of the desert, which was a massive disappointment, and really the main reason why I bought the thing. So have a careful think about drones before you shell out a load of your hard-earned, and also make sure that you're really good at flying them and you know how to do all the different camera tricks before you go. Another useful piece of technology is the intercom system, but once again, please make sure you're all on the same system. We've had trips where we've been on different systems and it has been genuinely awful. So a prerequisite for everyone that came on this one was that they needed a Pack Talk intercom. It was great fun, good banter over the airwaves. It's also good for safety, and you get to do a bit of formation riding. Now, talking about how technology can help you, think about also the language barrier, which isn't something I'd really considered before we went away. I speak English and I have absolutely no ability to speak Spanish or French, and I didn't really give it a second thought. So, a couple of the lads did a bit of forward thinking, and they had 30 days or so before they went away on the trip, and they downloaded the Duolingo app and they started to learn Spanish. Now, I've never used Duolingo. There's other products available, things like Babel and all sorts of language learning programs out there. And do you know what? We were walking into restaurants and these guys were talking Spanish like locals. Well, at least to me they were. It was really quite impressive, and I genuinely wished that I'd spent maybe a month or even longer just learning a bit of Spanish before we went away. So I have to admit that I was so impressed with the way the guys were talking that since we've come back, I've actually started to learn a new language as well. For the first time in my life, I was hopeless at it at school. I've tried a couple of times since, but I'm now getting really stuck into this, and I'm looking forward to the next time I go to Spain so that I too can start speaking it like one of the locals. Next up, I want to talk about what it's like to take your bike onto the ferry. I call it a ferry, but actually this was a cruise liner. There were people on there that were just enjoying the trip. Now, it's not a luxury cruise liner, but still very comfortable. There was a good bar area, there's lots of entertainment on, and we had a very small cabin. Now, the cabins were for two people. So me and my mate Sid walked in. We were in this tiny little room. There's a toilet and a single bed. And, well, we weren't both going to fit in there. So I said, Sid, looks like you're on the floor. But as it turned out, there was another bed that pulls down from the ceiling. So don't get caught out by that one. I guess these were the cheap cabins. Anyway, that was good enough just for us to stay for the night, and we went and had a few beers in the bar. So the crossing, as I mentioned earlier, was about 23 hours. It was pretty smooth. We saw dolphins. I can't really fault it, and the bikes were well looked after. And on that, you're probably wondering, look, how exactly did they look after the bikes? Well, let's start off with Plymouth as a port. We found that there was an awful lot of waiting around. There were loads of bikes, there were loads of cars, and there were various queues, and you'd be sent to get into a queue, and it always seems like everybody else is being allowed through before you are. But once we were on, as you'll see from the video, you go down into the ship and then you just get told exactly where to park your bike up. It's not difficult at all. And then a chap comes along, puts a great big ratchet strap over the bike with a pad underneath it, and then they crank it down, and it's just that single strap that holds the bike in place. And just to add that once you've parked up on the ship, you need to leave your handlebar lock off, you leave the bike in gear, and also you need to leave your side stand down, not a centre stand, and obviously no bike locks. That enables them to move the bike around a little bit if they need to, and also stops the bike from moving about because it's in gear. And that's really all there is to it. Once the bike's locked up, you grab whatever you need for the overnighter and head off into the ship and go and enjoy a night of entertainment. Finally, to mention that you're not allowed to go back down to the bikes once you've left them, so actually they are pretty safe. We certainly didn't see any evidence of bikes being tampered with whilst we were on board. So now let's talk about what it's actually like to ride the bike in Europe. So I've been over to countries that drive on the other side of the road to what I'm used to. Normally we're in Britain, so we drive on the left. You go across to mainland Europe, you drive on the right. Now, it's very awkward in a car because you're sat on the other side of the car. Everything's in a different place. But with your bike, it's the same bike, except that you ride on the right. And actually, riding on the right-hand side of the road feels very natural and very easy. Plus, the added bonus is you get to do that funky wave when you go past other bikers because you use the hand that's not on the throttle, whereas in the UK we just have to settle for a nod. Anyway, that aside, the roads generally through Europe, certainly the ones we went on, were fantastic compared to the UK. Let's be honest, roads in the UK at the moment are terrible. They're full of potholes and there's so many speed cameras. But look at the two countries we were in, Spain to start with, fantastic, beautifully tarmacked roads, very predictable. We didn't really see any speed cameras, so they did have some signs up saying that there were drones around that were monitoring bikes and cars for speed as we rode up through the Pyrenees, but I've got to say we didn't see any, and it's been a few weeks now, I haven't had any speeding tickets, so that's good news. The drivers generally were fantastic in Spain, no criticisms at all. Didn't hear a horn being tooted once, didn't see any road rage or anger, and another very obvious thing was the fact that there actually wasn't that much traffic on the roads. Now, admittedly, this was during May, so it's not during the school holidays, and that might have had something to do with it, but I've got to tell you, what a great time to go, May. Okay, the weather was a little bit changeable, but on the whole, I think that's a really good time of year to actually go there because, as I say, the roads were empty. It was just genuinely wonderful riding through Spain. So my view is that we peaked a little bit early on our trip. We went through the desert, which was fantastic. We went up the Pyrenees, which again was just sublime. And then from then on, we went down into France. The roads weren't quite as good, but still much, much better than they are in the UK. That aside, we weren't sure about what the French driving was going to be like. Maybe it's the years of rivalry between Britain and France, but I was always under the impression that French driving wasn't really up to much. I've certainly heard loads of horror stories about driving around Paris, but actually, the truth of it is, out on the countryside, on the roads there, the French drivers were utterly fantastic. They pulled their cars over to the side of the road to let us pass every single time, and every car did that. There wasn't anybody who got stroppy about the fact that there was a bike riding up behind them. They would literally take their cars and almost put them into ditches in order for us to get past. Also, they tell you that there's going to be a speed camera, then 50 yards later, there's a speed camera, and they're massive and obvious. So if you get caught speeding there, you're doing something very wrong. I say it was quite a long journey going up through France. We visited Lourdes with its beautiful church and its magical healing waters, although we went into the local town, which is a lot tackier, and we had pizza. So that was nice. From there, we went off and, as I say, continued up through France. We went to Bordeaux and we saw the reflecting pool and the marvellous architecture of Bordeaux and carried on. Now, I've got to say, the one saving grace for France for me was the fact that once we got to Brittany, which is right up there in the north of France, the roads, I've never been on anything like it. These long, sweeping, fast roads that just go on for miles and miles. We were buzzing by the time we came off there. It really was wonderful. And I say, the driving was great, the tarmac and the road quality was fantastic as well. It was just like our own personal racetrack. I do, however, have one last comparison between France and Spain, and that is the cost. The moment we went through the border from Spain into France, it almost doubled in price for everything. So eating out, drinking in Spain was as cheap as anything. As well as being more expensive, the other thing I noted about France was the fact that the hotels are very clinical and a little bit boring. I mean, we stayed in several and they tended to be just rooms, not much of a bar, if any at all, no real restaurant. You had to go out for all that kind of thing. Perhaps it was the ones we selected and we were unlucky, I'm not really sure. But all of this added up to make me think that perhaps a trip over to Spain and just riding around Spain and riding around the Pyrenees and then going back via Santander may have been a better trip. It certainly would have come in at about the same price, despite the fact that you would have had that very long ferry journey back as well. Okay, so I did say I was going to talk about what went right and what went wrong. I'm not going to go into too much detail. The thing that we got right was planning. All the effort that we put in beforehand, all the spreadsheeting, all the stuff on the cloud, all that was, I think, fantastic. It took away a lot of the stress, and that was a really good idea. I think every minute of planning was definitely worth it. On the downside, what did I get wrong? Well, I looked at the weather forecast for Spain and France the day or the week that we were due to go, and it just said scorchio, right? Hot all the way through, lots of sunshine, brilliant. So I made an executive decision. I've got a jacket that's kind of modular, so I thought I won't need the warm quilt in there, and the waterproof's a bit of a pain in the neck to put in and out, and it's going to get really hot, so I took the waterproof out as well. And because I was a bit tight on luggage, I didn't pack it. Now, I was fine for the first day, came off at the port, thought this is beautiful sunshine, this jacket's perfect, and then from there, once we started to go up the mountains, it started to rain. And in fact, on one day we had bright sunshine, wind, pouring rain. When we got to the top, there was snow, so I wasn't warm enough and I was soaking wet through. Luckily, one of the other guys there had a jacket with him, which I was able to use as an under jacket, which kept me warm and dry. So I owe my mate Lance a massive debt of gratitude, and don't worry, mate, you will be getting the jacket back very soon. In summary, though, a wonderful trip. It was 8 days end to end. We've totaled it up and we all agreed that we spent 1,250. That includes all the ferries, all the hotels and spending money. And we did a total of about 1,500 miles. Now, the last thing I want to say is thanks to all the guys I went with. It was an absolute blast. And I can honestly say that I have not laughed that much for a long time. So get out there, guys. Plan yourself a trip. You'll have a hoot. And all that leaves me to say is, whatever you do, make sure you keep those chains oiled, and I will see you soon.